Hey everyone, welcome to episode 335, Changing Bad Behaviors. Welcome to the Harmony in the Home podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hutchison. I'm a counselor, a life coach, and most importantly, an imperfect mom doing this work right along with you. And my goal on our podcast is to go from chaos to calm, feel less frazzled, and have more fun within your four walls to have more harmony in your home. So I was just going to say changing behaviors. I don't really like to label kids' behavior as good or bad because then that puts them into good and bad categories. I just titled it to kind of catch your eye, but I want you to see your child's behavior as not being so black and white, as so good and bad. I heard this the other day on a TikTok. It was something like, your kids have been alive for, and then you say the amount of days that they've been alive, and it's actually very jarring. And this parent was talking about the terrible twos, which I absolutely get the ick, and I get the cringe when people say like terrible twos, three nados, terrible teens, four nados, or maybe it's four nados. What's the threes? I can't remember. Because when you have that in your back of your mind, then you're only going to see your child through that filter, so to speak. So it's kind of like when you're shopping for the car and you want a certain Bronco, let's say, and then all you see on the road are Broncos, because your brain, you're telling it to look for the Broncos. So if you're saying all the time, terrible twos, and I know they're just said in jest, but we just want to be super careful how we label our kids, because then that's what we're going to see more of, and then we're going to illuminate and kind of accentuate more of that behavior that we don't want to see. So they had said, they were talking about a 2-year-old, and they said, this person's only been on this planet for 600, 700 days. And I was like, whoa, that just kind of puts it into perspective of how young they really are. And we expect them that they've been on this planet for 60 years and that they're fully formed humans. And that's just not the case. But when we drop our ego and we know that they've been alive for how many ever days, just ask Google, ask Alexa, ask your calculator. What is 365 times the age of your child? And that kind of puts into perspective of how young and innocent, and I don't want to say immature, but like immature in a nice way, if that makes sense, because they're not fully formed and they're still figuring out. And we're in our 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and we're still trying to figure it out. You want to look at things that they're doing or not doing as a life skill they've yet to develop. So they just need more practice in that area. Now, before I start going deeper into this, because I'm going to tell you the number one way to change, I'll just say tricky behavior, undesired behavior. I don't like to say bad behavior, but changing undesired behavior is not really a catchy title. So before we talk about that, I want to talk to you about herbal face food, which I can't shut my face up about, literally. And it is so good for if you want smooth skin, you want to get rid of the blotchy spots. I know I have so many sunspots, and we have a coupon code. If you use the coupon code Harmony20 and you go to herbalfacefood.com and you get anything, it will take 20% off your first order, and it's a way to support the show, to keep the lights on for this podcast, because it's so much fun, and I cannot believe that we're almost to 350. Well, not really. We're 15 away, but still, that's 15 weeks. But I guess it just flies. Like, I feel like we just started like yesterday. So the number one way, I would say, if I could do a whole presentation on how to change behavior, I would look at the behavior that you see as a pattern. You don't want to look at events. Like I always ask parents, is this an event or is this a pattern? If it's a pattern of behavior, then you need to disrupt the pattern. If your child is constantly hitting, then you need to look at hitting as a problem, so to speak, that is becoming a pattern, and we want to disrupt that pattern. If they do a one-off, then we still deal with it, but we don't have to go through all the steps of changing the behavior, so to speak, because it's an event, not a pattern, if that makes sense. So look at pattern behaviors. Look at the behaviors that are really getting under your skin, under your spouse's skin, under your sibling's skin. And then you have to take your ego out of it and see your child is having a hard time versus giving you a hard time. It's a life skill they've yet to develop. And so we need to look at the opposite of the undesired behavior. So what is the desired behavior? And then catch them and set them up for success doing that behavior and flip out when they're doing it. I always tell the story about one of my kids was in first grade. Without mentioning names, you probably heard this story before, but if not, I won't throw anybody under the bus because they're now teenagers and they don't want all their stories out and about. But they were in first grade and they were getting notes home from the first grade teacher. And me, as a former first grade teacher, I was so triggered. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my worst nightmare. Because one of the reasons why I was so unconscious in the beginning were, well, three-prong. I feel like it's three-prong. My infertility really, really, really played into my unconscious, like, snappy behavior towards the kids. Number two is being a teacher. I almost knew too much, and I didn't want to have kids that were upsetting their first grade teacher. And then also, I wanted to be just like my parents because I put them on such a pedestal. They're still up on the pedestal. And I wanted to be just like them, and I want to have the exact same relationship that we have with my kids. And then when I didn't see that happening, I would say those three things, I don't know, they kind of like vacillated between the three. I would say in that order is probably what was triggering me the most and like was playing in the background when I did a lot of mind management and I did some journaling, figure out like what is at the forefront. I would say it was infertility, then being a teacher, and then my parents, the pedestal effect. I should do a whole podcast about the pedestal effect. So it was like, oh my gosh, this is my worst nightmare come true in my brain. I'm like, Kelly, calm down. What would you do if this was a student in your classroom and you had a parent conference? What would you do if this was a student that you were counseling and they were in your counselor office? What would you do if you were talking to your sister? That's how you get your ego out of it. Because what would you do if you weren't the parent at this moment? And what I used to always tell parents, and I still tell parents to this day, and I tell myself every single day, is you find the opposite of what they're doing, set them up for success doing that, know their love language, and then reinforce it with their love language. That is like the key to success with changing behavior. So they were getting notes home about responsibility. It was things like not turning their work in, doing the work, but not turning it into the proper basket, not putting their name on, not remembering their school supplies, just very spacey energy kind of stuff going on. And I know that this person got it from me because I'm pretty spacey. David has never lost a sock. He doesn't have a spacey bone in his body. Me, I'm like kind of all over the map. I'm not type B, but I'm very, like, I could be type B if like I didn't like work at it. So I was like, all right, I got to do the opposite. I got to catch this child being responsible. I got to set them up for success, like set up a setting where they're super responsible and then reinforce it. This child happened to be, at the time, was very much physical touch was their love language. So when they were getting ready to go to school, I would put their backpack and lunchbox literally right in the front door. They had to trip over their backpack and lunchbox to get out the door. And this is a child who would leave without their lunchbox. Probably not their backpack, but definitely without the lunchbox. So they would trip over it and pick it up and like, oh yeah, I got to get that. It was mostly the lunchbox, I think, not so much the backpack. And I would flip. I'm like, whoa, look how responsible you are remembering your lunchbox. Did anybody give you reminders? This child doesn't know that I set it up there on purpose. And they get all puffy and they're like, no, I remembered on my own. I'm like, you are so responsible. Does it feel good to be responsible? And I give them a high five or a hug and just kind of freak out, but not like, it doesn't take any more time of our day. It was just like on the go kind of thing. And then I'd move the lunchbox not in front of the door. I'd do that for a day or two. And then I'd move it to the next, like probably a couple feet away from the door. Same thing would happen. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Then I put it on the dining room bench. Then I put it on the dining room table. Then I put it on and you just kind of do this in stages. And then I moved it in the kitchen. Then I moved it where they were making their own lunch and have to remember the day before. And then I'd move it to the refrigerator. It's inside the refrigerator. And the same thing, rinse, repeat, until the child started to feel like they were responsible and it started to create habits and they were starting to tell themselves that they were responsible. So then I saw that following through with their homework, with their rooms, it just kind of like ripples over at everything else. When you tell a child over and over that they are a certain trait, they will believe it and then they become it. And then in the yearbook, this teacher signed the yearbook and said, wow, you have become so responsible. You went from losing your art box and not knowing where to turn things in to being a leader in the class and showing everybody else how to go. Like your growth has been, and I was like, this is the effect of rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Focusing on what you want them to do, catching them do it, setting it up in such an exaggerated way that they almost like can't fail. And you don't have to do all the things. They don't have to become a completely responsible child. You just choose one thing, then you choose two things, then you choose three things, and you're constantly telling them how responsible they are in a way that you're actually washing their brain and brainwashing them in a positive way to believe the things you want them to become. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. over and over and over. It's rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Parenting is a lot of rinse, repeat, and then the compound effect over time is they start to feel like they're responsible, and you're not telling them day in and day out. Another way, I would say that is number one. And then number two, equally as important, is modeling that trait that you want them to absorb from you. So yeah, you can tell them, yeah, you can set them up, and all that is great. The number, I would say it's tied for this little trait that little trick I just taught you. This way is also tied. And that is modeling, 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 modeling. I always tell people my kids make me the nicest humans because I'm doing random acts of kindness. I'm always making sure I'm bringing the shopping cart back. I'm paying for the person behind me. I'm making sure that the bill is correct. And if they've not charged me for something, I'm telling the manager they didn't charge me for my nachos that I got. And the kids are just seeing that day in and day out. Did I do that before, kids? Probably not as much. I'd be like, wow, I got free nachos, or that shopping cart's fine over there. But I just found myself thinking, and I was consciously thinking, and then it felt so good to pay for the person behind me. It felt good to bring the cart back. It felt good to tell the manager. And then usually the manager would be like, oh, you can have the nachos for free for being so honest. It felt good to do that. And then I just started doing it because it felt good to do those things. And so when you are constantly looking for ways to model the traits that you want to do and you want to see in your kids, and doing it in a very intentional way and saying, wow, I feel so responsible that I remembered to bring my wallet to the store because sometimes I leave it in the car, and I really want to get better at. So tell your kids over and over and over that trait we're talking about. We're just talking about responsibility right now. Whatever that trait is, fill in the blanks, catch them doing it, reinforce it with their love language, and then also set yourself up that you're doing it as well, and then talking out loud to them how you're working on it, even if it's not a trait you're working on. So if responsibility is the name of the game for the week, then you could say something like, I usually leave my sunglasses on the counter, but I wrote a note to myself on the door. It says sunglasses because I want to be more responsible, remembering my sunglasses so when I'm driving, I can drive safer and have my favorite sunglasses on while I'm driving. That is such a simple little skill that you're teaching them about responsibility. And then they actually see the note. It says, Kelly, remember your sunglasses on the sticky note. So then they will pick that up and be like, hey, when I'm trying to remember something, I'm going to write myself a note. A little trick that I do that I taught my kids is whenever I'm laying in bed and I want to remember something and I don't want to get up and write it down, I might take my rings and put them on a different finger. So then when I wake up in the morning, I remember, why are my rings like this? Oh, that's right, because I want to remember X, Y, Z. And so now I'm hearing my kids saying that, oh, I was doing that, but then I left one sock on and took the other sock off. So then when I woke up in the morning, I'd be like, why do I have one sock on? Oh, that's why I want to remember X, Y, Z. So you won't believe how powerful modeling is. And then also setting them up for success, catching them doing it, and reinforcing it with their love language. Those two together, chef's kiss. And doing that day in and day out, and telling your kids day in and day out the different traits that you see in them, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they believe it themselves. You have to believe it about yourself first so you can project it onto them. And that modeling, it's like a mirror image, so to speak. And so instead of spending so much time focusing on your kids, spend time focusing on yourself and the energy in which you're bringing to the table, the traits you're teaching to the table, the modeling that you're doing, whether you're caught in traffic, and they are seeing all the things. And I found this on Facebook. He summarizes it absolutely perfectly. And so I want you to listen to this.
Neuroscience fact. Your kids will handle frustrating situations exactly how they see you handle them. They're walking around as tiny versions of your triggers, stress responses, and your coping mechanisms. They're not listening to what you say about handling hard things. They're downloading exactly how you do it. I'll explain the neuroscience behind this and what you can do about it. Mirror neurons in your child's brain are constantly recording how you handle frustration. Every time you lose it in traffic, snap when you're overwhelmed, or shut down when things get hard, your child's mirror neuron system is taking notes. These specialized brain cells mirror your responses internally. Try this. Instead of seeing your triggers as annoying interruptions, start seeing them as helpful alerts. That moment when you feel the frustration rising, that's not a problem. That's a cue that this is where the work happens. Your kids are watching, so now's your chance to model the emotional regulation you want to see in them. Start small. Take 3 breaths before you respond. Say out loud, I'm feeling frustrated, so I'm going to pause and think.
Isn't that good? And that's literally what we're talking about. Day in and day out, the modeling, it doesn't stop. And then the compound effect that over time, You eventually pull yourself out of it. You're building these wings, one wing, one fiber at a time, and then you become the wind beneath their wings, so to speak. And you're not so much doing that rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. It's not so exhaustive because you kind of see the product of all of that positive self-fulfilling prophecy and that positive just like filling them up, filling them up, filling them up. So then they start to believe it and become it themselves. And then, yeah, you can say it, but it doesn't impact them as much because they believe it themselves. So true. So it's kind of like telling my blonde-haired child that they have blonde hair. They're like, oh, yeah, of course I have blonde hair, because they already believe it in themselves so much. And it's so built into the fiber of who they are that when we say it when they're older, it's kind of like, well, yeah, why are you stating the obvious? So when you put that work in when they're younger, it pays off when they're older, I promise. So let me know your biggest takeaway on this episode. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Hey mamas, thanks for listening. If you had any ahas, clicks, or those lightning bolt moments while listening, you have to check out my free parenting bootcamp, where we take all of this to the next level and we try to create even more awakenings for ourselves so that we can connect more with our kids and never yell at them again. You can sign up at www.coachingkelly.com. And if you really want to fill up my love cup, send me an email of what your aha was, what your click was, what was that lightning bolt moment while you were listening. I want nothing more in life than for you to have harmony in your home and to learn how to be an imperfect mom like me, which allows your kids to be imperfect too, each and every day. Thanks for listening.